Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, September 9th around here, and we have a packed show for you today, that is for sure. We're going to start talking about Texas heading up to Ann Arbor and just obliterating Michigan for about 4 quarters, well, 3.5 quarters, and then took their foot well off the gas towards the end of that game. Then we'll get into another just splattering. Tennessee over NC State 51-10, domination, and really sets up Tennessee for a really bright future under Josh Heupel, which we'll get into in that segment. Then we'll get into kind of a twofer. We'll get into Nebraska handling Colorado and 28-10 in that one. And then Iowa State staged a big-time comeback in the Cy-Hawk Trophy battle, 20-19 over Iowa. Just an incredible second half from Rocco back there. Then we'll get into some upsets. NIU just shocked Notre Dame this past weekend, going up to South Bend and getting a win. But some other Group of 5 teams had plenty to say about this weekend and got very, very close to doing the exact same thing. So we'll break those down as well. Then we'll get to a week 1 whip around. Everything else you need to know, especially with the top 25 teams, what we'll do today. And then we have plenty more to get to that we'll get to tomorrow. So tons of stuff, and it's going to take us a little bit longer than today, just today, to get to all of it. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat below that chat feature on the Sports Network page. Great way for you guys to just click on that, add any question, comment you'd like, and it'll pop up on the screen. We can have a fun back and forth here. Always good to have this be interactive, and that's what I want. Want this to be a little bit more interactive as we get further and further into the season, so utilize that if you'd like. And also, the GSMC Podcast.net page is still up and working if that's a little bit easier for you all, but sometimes that super chat is just a little bit easier to access. So, going to be an incredible couple of months here, so definitely join on the ride, get a little bit interactive here. Would love to get this more of a fan-driven show going forward. But let's get into this, because there was a domination that happened up in Ann Arbor this past weekend, and it was at the hands of the Longhorns to the Wolverines, and this one was a beatdown. There's really no other way to put it. And this one could have been much worse than it was, because Texas took their foot well off the gas pedal in the fourth quarter of this game and just kind of rode it out to the finish. Michigan made a couple of plays at the end to make it look a little bit better, including a couple of really good balls from Davis Warren down the stretch of this game that we can talk about here in a minute. But the story of the game, without a doubt to me, is the Texas O-line. They walked into this game with a level of aggression, with a level of intensity that I really haven't seen from Texas in quite some time. I think the Alabama game last year was right on that same level, but this was a game where they walked in and knew that if Michigan was going to beat them, it was going to be because they out-physicaled them. That was really the only way that Michigan was going to be able to get this one done, and they didn't even come close. This Michigan D-line with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant got pushed around for a lot of the day. Now, they made their fair share of plays and forced Quinn Ewers out of the pocket. He just continued to make those plays when he did, but at the end of the day, when you give up 0 sacks and only 5 pressures to that defensive line, your offensive line had one of the best days of the entire team. And I think it's possible that they were the best unit for Texas throughout this game, and there were a lot of good units for Texas. For Michigan on the other side, or let's talk about Quinn Ewers here for a second, because it was his show on Saturday. There's no doubt about that. This kid went to work, and I talked about it last week. I said this is a game where you're going up against Wink Martindale. You're going up against the reigning national champions in their building. This is a chance to become a first-round prospect. There's no doubt in my mind that he is a first-round guy at this point. Now, it's a matter of battling for that number 1 spot, and Shedeur did not do himself any favors this week, which we'll get into in a couple of segments here. But at the end of the day, on the Michigan side, they have the same problems they did a week ago. This O-line is not in the place that it needs to be, especially if they're going to run that offense they did a year ago. Khalil Mullings is a great running back, and so is Donovan Edwards. The holes aren't there for them to be succeeding. Texas did a great job of closing a lot of those up, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, there was a mismatch when it came to Texas D-line, particularly the depth of that D-line and the O-line of Michigan, and it was clear and obvious because then you had to have Davis Warren pushing the ball downfield in a game that you did not want this way to go. So it's definitely a very, very impressive performance from Texas. Top to bottom, this is one of the best performance, if not the best performance I've seen from Steve Sarkisian's Texas team, and it comes with a lot of expectations now. Now you are the team that everyone's looking at to possibly win a national title, but as of right now, they are on just cruise control. They look absolutely in full control of what they're doing, and Michigan just looked lost for much of this game. But let's get into why Texas won in particular, and the biggest thing is game plan and coaching, no doubt about it. Steve Sarkisian had an interesting battle in this game. It was him against Wink Martindale, one of the most incredible and, experienced defensive coordinators in the entire football world. Sark decidedly won that battle. It was all over the place, this Michigan defense, and Texas took advantage of every single opening that they gave them. And it was incredible to watch the play calling go to work because Steve Sarkisian just had them in the palm of his hand for the vast majority of this game. There were tons of motions, there were different personnel groups, there was tons of confusing pre-snap stuff that Michigan's defense was just all types of confused about. And then on the defensive side of the ball, game planning, it was rather easy, right? You take away that run game, you put the ball in Davis Warren's hands, you get up early, which they did and very much helped them in this, and then you go to work. And then you kind of just wear this team down. Michigan went for 22 carries, 82 yards, not at all what they wanted to do in this game, and it forced them to pass the ball a lot more, and that's when Texas took advantage. Had 2 picks on Davis Warren, and it was really just one of those games where everything from start to finish went just about Texas' way, except for a holding penalty on the first drive, and even then it felt like the writing was on the wall that Texas was going to roll in this game after that first drive. In fact, in the first half, Texas ran 45 plays, 36 of them were in Michigan territory. They were all over Michigan from start to finish, at least in the first half, and then they took their foot off the gas pedal by a pretty aggressive margin in the second half and just kind of rode this one out to a victory. But the other part of this was physicality, and we talked about it with the O-line and the D-line playing really good football, but this Michigan D-line has 2 first-round talents without a doubt in Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. They got handled for a lot of this game. Kenneth Grant, there were a couple of plays where he just got outright pancaked by whether it was Hayden Connor or Jake Majors, might have been outright the best player on the football field this past weekend because the way he exploded off the ball was just incredible to watch throughout this game. But at the end of the day, this is a Michigan defensive line that is really good. There's no two ways about that. There's no argument to say, maybe they weren't as good as we thought they were. Now, the depth is not nearly where it needs to be, and that is the big time Achilles heel of this defensive line. But even when the front guys were in there, it was pretty much domination from this Texas offensive line, and it shows you just how far they've come in only a couple of years, where a couple of years ago they were outmatched pretty much every which way from Tuesday on that offensive line. But on the D-line, they did a great job of slowing down this tough running game for Michigan. I think it's one of those things where they knew what they had to do coming in. They knew that they were a group that a lot of people had questions about. They knew that they were going to be attacked early on in this game. They answered the bell and then some. There were so many guys rotating in, which was the difference in this game in a lot of ways. Texas had multiple guys to rotate in on the defensive line and the offensive line, although I don't think they utilized that too much, but Michigan just did. They don't have the guys on the back end of this team to really supplement some of the worries they have on the front end. So it's one of those things where Michigan last year, it was incredible team top end. It's not to say, this team, the starting 11 or starting 22 for Michigan last year wasn't incredible because it was off the charts awesome. What really made that team special, though, was the depth behind them. And now you just don't have that. Not nearly to the level that you had a year ago, and Texas took full advantage of that one. So this is one that could have gotten a lot uglier, and one of the big-time reasons is Quinn Ewers. He went to work in this game, and it was so impressive to watch him mature just in this game. I mean, you watch him from, if people want to go back and watch that Arkansas game in his first year, or go back and watch that Oklahoma State game in his first year, and then watch this one, you genuinely will believe that someone took his body. You would genuinely believe it's an entirely different person. It's a spirit that has taken over his body, and it's Tom Brady now, because the kid is so comfortable. The kid makes every single play that's right in front of them, and when a Michigan defense that can get you into trouble very quickly, he just made the play that was in front of him. He made the play that he needed to make, and then when one really needed to be made by him, man, did he make it. That throwing, that touchdown to Gunnar Helm to start the game, who also had might have been the player of the game outside of Quinn Ewers. Just incredible play from that tight end that they very much needed in this game because Michigan was just trying to take away everything upfield. He was just underneath and caught every single pass and had a really, really awesome day. But overall, the biggest thing for me was how he responded. There were multiple times, especially early on in this game, where Texas was just 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 8, and then he made every pass. He made every single throw. They went 10 and 16 on third down throughout this game, and I would bet you that a lot of those third down stops came in the second half of this game when they were running the ball on third down when they could have passed the ball. So it's one of those things where every single thing you needed Quinn Ewers to do in this game, he did. There was not a beat miss, there was not a moment miss, and there was not something that he threw a ball and you felt nervous about where it was going. He was just on fire, and it put him in a position where now I'd have a hard time not putting him at least number 1 or number 2. We'll talk about who I think is number 1 in a couple of segments here, but he's one of those guys that just shot himself to the top of the Heisman candidacy, and he absolutely should, because just a remarkable performance from this kid on Saturday. Where does Michigan go from here? That's the big-time question I'll have for both of these teams real quickly here, and this one's tough because you look at this team, they don't have a true identity on offense. If your offensive line is not going to be as deep or is not as dominant as it was a year ago, you're not going to be able to run the ball as efficiently. Frankly, I think they have to get Alex Orji more involved in this offense. I think you have to be more dynamic running the ball. You have to give them more to think about on that defensive front rather than let's just collapse to the middle and then force Davis Warren to beat us with his arm. And then the other part of it is you still don't have a true wide receiver one. You still don't have a guy that you can go to every single down and feel really confident in that. Samaj Morgan made some really good plays in this game, but at the end of the day, the majority of his yards were on that touchdown to Davis Warren in garbage time. So at the end of the day, they need someone on that outside. And right now, it looks like no one is even close to taking that realm. I think Samaj Morgan has a shot. I think Tyler Morris probably should have at this point, but has not. I think it's just one of those things where Michigan is in one of those positions where offensively, if it's not going to be Colston Loveland and it's not going to be this run game, you have no shot to be able to put up points against really any team, but especially the elite teams that you're going to have to beat throughout the season, including a USC game that's coming up here pretty soon. So there's a ton on the plate, but at the end of the day, the defense isn't as good as it was a year ago, particularly on the back end and in depth in general, but they are still very capable. Michigan's defense is going to keep them in a lot of these games because I would argue the Texas offense made them look a little bit worse than they are. Quinn Ewers was on fire. Steve Sarkisian was calling every right play, and it just looked incredible from that side of the ball. So I'm trying not to hold too much against this Michigan defense right now, but at the end of the day, they'll still be in a lot of games, but they got to figure out that quarterback position. I know a lot of Michigan fans have been calling for Jaden Davis to possibly take some reps. I don't hate the idea. As of right now, you don't have a lot going for you, and maybe the answer is the kid at sitting on the bench right now. But we'll see what happens there, and we'll keep you updated as it does. But for Texas, go to work. That's the end-all, be-all after this game. This is the game that, launches you off. It was the same thing with Alabama a year ago, where now you're in a part of the season where things might have just gotten a little bit harder. This is a game where you get up for it. You know what you're going into. You know you want to win this game. You know how big of a deal this game is and everything in between. So it's not hard to get up for this game. It might be a little bit harder to get up for UTSA or for ULM in a couple of weeks. And then you got Mississippi State coming to town. More than anything, last year we saw Alabama fall to Texas, and Texas put on an incredible performance in week 2. From there forward, Texas had a number of games that were very, very close, some that they hypothetically should have lost in some different circumstances, and they were able to get out wins. But in the SEC, those margins are even thinner, so they have to be very, very careful moving forward, because as great of a win as this is, and I think it's a lot better than some people are giving it credit for, I do think this is one of those things where you just got to make sure you don't get complacent. You got to make sure a Mississippi State team doesn't walk in there and really give you a run for your money. But then, huge props to Steve Sarkisian and his staff. I mean, we talk about how much Michigan lost, and Michigan lost just so much more than Texas did, to be totally fair. But Texas did get 11 guys drafted, lost their top 4 pass catchers, the best best defensive players and defensive linemen on their team, lost the starting running back, starting right tackle. They lost a lot of guys and still found their way back to playing just elite level football. So as of right now, all system goes for Texas. They are in have everything in front of them to possibly go to a playoff, to possibly win a national title. But now it's time to really deliver. Now it's time to get past this big time game that everyone was looking forward to, and now it's time to execute. And we'll see what they can do over the next little bit, because last year it was a big time problem executing at the level they needed to down the stretch of that season. So it's going to be interesting to watch this team, but as of right now, dominating performance. And this Texas team, as good as last year's team was, this looks like a better, more complete team to me. So definitely a team that absolutely will have plenty to say about the college football playoff. But let's take our first break. We went a little bit long there, got a little bit into the weeds about Texas. But at the end of the day, let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Tennessee just rolling over NC State, another dominating performance by a top 25 team. And it was an interesting one. So I want to break that one down right after this. So stick with us.